Welcome to the Freedom Real Estate Podcast with your boy Andrew and his buddy Artem. How you doing today, Artem?
I'm good.
Great to hear. So today's episode is sponsored by Celsius. Get this shit, it gives you a ton of energy. We're actually not sponsored by Celsius, but we will gladly take some sponsorship, so please reach out. So in today's episode, we're going to be going over strategies on how to bring less money to deals, right? Because the less money you bring to deals, the more that enhances your cash on cash return.
Absolutely.
So there's a multitude of strategies you can do to not bring as much cash to close as possible, right? And one of the easiest strategies is what's called a seller credit. Artem, explain to me, what is a seller credit?
So seller credit is when you increase the purchase price a little bit, but then you get that difference back at the closing table from the seller. So essentially it's a wash, but you get a little bit of money back at closing.
Yeah, more or less a seller credit is added on the loan, right? So if it's $1 million purchase and you get a $20,000 seller credit, you'll get a loan for $1,020,000 from the bank, right? And when you get that loan, the bank will give you $20K on the HUD and you get the money back in your pocket, right? Reducing your out-of-pocket cost by $20,000.
But caveat to that, some banks do place a limit on how much money back you can get at closing. So make sure you find that out.
Absolutely. But more or less, it's a really easy strategy to bring less cash to close, right? And normally, I actually build in a 2% seller credit for every offer I submit. In addition, I normally build in a 2% buyer's commission, right? And that results in me having to bring 4% less to closing, resulting in, if I normally had to bring 25% down, I would only have to bring 21% down.
Now, let me ask you this. Is this because you're an agent and you're representing yourself, or can a normal person do this too?
You're exactly correct. I am an agent and I am representing myself in these deals. And as a result, I can get the 2% buyer's commission directly back into my pocket.
Nice. I love it. Now, what's our next strategy?
So a fantastic strategy that not many people utilize in a correct manner, in my opinion, is the seller finance note, Artem. So normally, how do you think a seller finance note works?
So you can have the seller act as the bank where they hold the note for you instead of the bank.
Exactly. And that's how normally everybody thinks a seller finance note works, right? But the sophisticated investor actually gets a smaller seller finance note to help them bring less money to the deal, right?
So not the whole.
Yeah. So, I mean, normally a lot of people don't own the property outright, right? They have a lien on the property. So a lot of times you actually have to get a loan on that property to buy them out, right? So rather than having the seller carry the whole note, the seller can actually carry a small portion of the note, resulting in less money in the deal.
Now our next strategy might be a little bit more advanced. It's called Novations. So essentially it's when you're trying to buy a property that needs rehab, but instead of you buying it, you doing the rehab and you selling it, you actually have the seller hold on to it and they pay the holding costs while you do the renovations. And then when you sell it for them, that's when they get their money as well. Now, I understand you have a couple examples of such a strategy.
Yeah, I mean, people seem to forget when you do a flip or you do a short-term project, a lot of time the transaction costs and the holding costs are ultimately what kill you, right? Paying the monthly mortgage on that property, paying the monthly utility, the monthly overhead, paying closing costs from the attorney, paying points to the lender. That adds up to 5, 6, 7, 8% of the purchase price. So if you can avoid that and you can have the seller hold the note, own the property while you do the renovation and come up with some sort of profit share agreement that they hold the property while you do the renovation. When you sell it, you'll share the profits. It's a very effective strategy when you run into those tight deals that really cannot support the holding costs or the transaction costs on a short-term project.
Especially if the seller happens to be locked in a low rate like a 3%, and it would be a 7% note to you if you were to buy it today. Have them hold on to that same 3% and keep paying the lesser mortgage.
The next strategy, and this really goes back to commercial lending, is you can actually have the bank cover construction costs, right? And typically when I'm getting commercial loans, I always have the bank cover up to 75 to 100% of the construction costs. And what that results in me, having to bring less money to the deal, right? Say, for example, if I'm buying $1 million asset and I have to put $400,000 into it, and the bank will cover 100% of that. That results in me having to bring $400,000 less to the deal,
Love it.
right? So, construction money is a really powerful way to lower your out of pocket costs and really enhance your cash on cash return.
Nice. And our final strategy, probably the simplest one, is if you buy a property cheap enough, if you get a good enough deal. What can you do with that one, Andrew?
Fantastic point, right? So I actually bought this 5 unit in Worcester, Massachusetts. I got it for $525,000. This thing is worth 1.2, 1.3 all day, right? But because we bought it with in such a good equity position, we found a non-traditional lender to give us a 100% loan at 100% of the purchase price and 100% of the construction, right? So at closing, I only ended up having to bring $8,200 to close in this bad boy.
But that usually only works in the case that if the bank were to turn around and sell it right then and there, they would get much more than what you paid for it, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. Like the all-in cost for that particular property with the purchase price and the renovation was probably 65 to 70% of the after repair value, right? So there was so much freaking equity in there that if I defaulted on the loan, the lender could simply sell the property and probably make $200,000 to $300,000.
So this next one is if you're dealing with a bad tenant and you need to get them out. A very common strategy that you can use is cash for keys. That is when you give $2,000, $5,000, $7,000 for your tenant to leave and give you the keys instead of having to take them to court. Now, Andrew, what are some of the best strategies that you know for doing this?
Yeah, so this is especially applicable in blue states, right? States where tenants have a ton of rights, right? And when it comes to cash for keys, it's simply a lot of times a mathematical formula,
Absolutely.
right? So, Artem, let me ask you this, right? If a tenant's paying $1,000, right, and it's going to take 6 months to get them out, how much will that cost you in vacancy?
$6,000.
That's exactly correct, right? And you got to paint the unit, right? You got to lease the unit, right? You got to pay the eviction attorney. It could probably end up costing you $10,000 to get that tenant out, right?
An eviction attorney alone, just to engage, might charge you $3,000 to $5,000 upfront, period.
Yeah. Exactly. So, when I do that calculation in my head, I'll go to them and I'll start with like, hey, I understand times are tough. I'll just let you leave the unit free of charge. I won't file any eviction paperwork. It's so hard to rent a unit with an eviction on your record. Like, let's just avoid that, right? 7 times out of 10, they'll just leave, right?
Yeah.
They don't leave. Maybe I'll start with $1,000, right? And then I potentially might work my way up in this particular scenario up to like $5,000, right? At the end of the day, it sucks that I got to pay this tenant when they didn't pay me, when they promised to pay me rent for this unit. But at the end of the day, I'm saving $5,000 in that situation, right?
Absolutely. What's more important, your ego or your wallet here?
Exactly. It's honestly an ROI calculation, right? And like, have you ever read that book, like, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey?
Absolutely.
One of my favorite books, right? And in there, they talk about thinking from different paradigms, right? Some people think from a family paradigm, how is this going to affect my family? Some people think from a relationship paradigm, how is this going to affect my loved ones, right? In real estate, you strictly have to think from an ROI paradigm. What's the best return on investment based off this decision, and remove the ego?
Absolutely. However, caveat here, make sure you get it in writing and make sure that they only get the money after they hand you the keys, not up front.
After they're out of the unit and you have a locksmith right there ready to change the locks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've ran that situation before where you paid the tenant, they stayed right in your unit, and it was not fun. Yeah, so, getting tenants out, normally the process normally starts with the tenant not paying you rent, you give them notice. Right after a certain period, you file that with court, right? And then at that point, you get a court date, right? And typically, court dates might take anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 months, depending on the area, right? And then from that court date, it might take 1 to 2 months to get them out, at least in Massachusetts, right? So that process can take anywhere from 3 to 6 months, right? So that's kind of normally the process during the eviction, right? And obviously, when you're trying to get tenants out, it's a staggered approach, right? You first want to try to negotiate, create win-wins. You might move to cash for keys, right? And then at a certain point, if there's really no movement, then at that point, you simply hire an eviction attorney and wait 3 to 6 months, right? So that's normally the levels you take when trying to evict a tenant, right? But just remember, always have cash for keys in your back pocket, because it is one of the most effective tools in real estate.
Absolutely. Now, the next one that we want to talk with you guys about is out-of-state investing. This might be if you're in a very expensive market and you want to get into real estate, so you're looking for cheaper areas, or it might be that you're just on the border with another state and you see a good deal, maybe 5 to 10 minutes away from your house, but it happens to be a different state. Now, Andrew, you've recently done a little bit of journey into Rhode Island. Why don't you tell us about your experience there?
Sure. I mean, I really don't consider that out of state. It's within a 30 to 45-minute drive.
But it's technically a different jurisdiction and different taxes.
Fair point. Fair point. It is, right? And to your point, there's a ton of different regulations associated with each
Hmm.
state, right? And surprisingly, Rhode Island has very landlord friendly eviction laws, right? Like I can get tenants out in 3 weeks to a month in
Hmm.
Rhode Island versus Massachusetts, right? It could take anywhere from 3 to 6 months, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of one difference, right? Another difference in Rhode Island is they have this thing called a lead safe, where every unit's required to get a lead safe. It's not even a lead cert; it's a lower standard than a
Hmm.
lead cert, right?
But
But
it's
more
required by law for every single unit. And it's
exactly. I,
at
I
your
believe,
expense.
yeah, every 1 or 2 years, something like that, right? So that's just an added administrative burden in Rhode Island
Hmm.
versus Massachusetts. So just knowing those rules and knowing that every state has different nuances, can either make or break your number. I mean, those lead safes, like that can add up to like thousands of dollars a year,
Hmm.
over time, right? It really can affect your NOI or your income in the property, right? That's
Hmm.
kind of one aspect, right? But I think one of the most important things you really have to understand is the tax implications, right?
Absolutely.
Because taxes are your second highest expense behind the mortgage, right? And you really have to understand how the city assesses the property on a regular basis and how they really calculate taxes, right?
Hmm.
Because if a city based taxes off sales price versus 70% of the sales price, right? That's going to have a huge outcome on your bottom line.
Hmm. Absolutely. And another thing that you have to remember is a lot of these little rules, especially with renting a property or maybe some things about the purchase, are kind of like a local thing that you only really know once you get into it. So if you don't have somebody right there explaining to you, you might be very, very much surprised about some regulation that's not really written anywhere, but is still the law of the land when you go to buy or sell.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really good point, Artem, and the solution to that is finding an investor-focused agent, an investor-focused team
Hmm.
in any given market. When I go into a new market, when I went into Rhode Island, I specifically found investor-focused brokers, right? And they
Hmm.
really pointed me to the right team. They really pointed me to the regulation that I should be aware of, that I should comply with, right? And it saved me a ton of headache, right? It's more or less a cheat code, right? Like, why do I have to learn all this stuff when I can leverage somebody who's already gone through the grind of figuring this stuff out?
Hmm. So now, what are some of the reasons why somebody might want to consider investing out of state? What are some advantages and disadvantages?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, investing out of state allows you access to certain markets that might provide you a higher return than your
Hmm.
market, right? Ultimately, if you're trying to invest in a certain asset class, it's way easier to invest in that asset class when there's a lot of that
Hmm.
asset class, right? So if you don't have a lot of multis in your state, you might be forced to invest in states that have a lot of multifamily, right?
Hmm. Another reason might be is if you're trying to be hands off and you're going to have property management do most of the stuff for you anyways, then it doesn't really matter if you're in your local market or somewhere far away. So go for the highest ROI, go for the biggest cash flow you can get. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would definitely caveat that by saying that wherever you invest, it's extremely important to have somebody you trust as boots on the ground.
Absolutely. And even if you're far away, maybe it's worth visiting maybe like once a year just to make sure, hey, my property is still there. My property management is doing what they said that they're going to do. Trust but verify.
Yeah, maybe a little more than once a year, but yes, absolutely agree with you, Rodham. So I'll just give you a quick example of my personal experience investing in out of state, right? So my buddy Wendell brought me a 32 unit in Lancaster, South Carolina, right? Didn't really know the market, but I knew Wendell. The market was very fast growing, and it was a really good deal. I think we got it for $65,000 a door, and they rent for $1,000 each. So
Hmm.
made sense all day, right? So Artem ended up bringing us a deal. We ended up putting the deal together, raising money from investors, closing the deal, and he was our boots on the ground, right? And some things we learned throughout the process was, definitely be aware of tax laws within that county, because right when we closed, I think they doubled our taxes, right? And
Hmm.
I think our insurance went up 30 to 40%. So be aware and have conservative underwriting,
Hmm.
right? And leverage local experts in the market. One of our biggest mistakes that we ran across was we didn't quite understand the sensitivity to the price, right? Like we listed everything at, I think, we raised the rent to about $1,000 a unit, right? And we ended up
Hmm.
getting vacancy of 26 of 32 units. We had to turn 26
Wow.
units, right? But we didn't realize like that shift from 1,000 to 950. Like right, we went to 950. We started renting units like crazy, right? So understanding that
Hmm.
like that market was extremely sensitive to pricing, and it resulted in us having more vacancy than anticipated.
Hmm. And that was because you guys were going for like a more luxury level, or
Exactly.
and then you, as soon as you switch the price a little bit, all of a sudden, boom, you engage the middle of the road cut.
Exactly. I mean, ultimately, we provide a luxury product, but it was a suburb, right? Like, you got to
Hmm.
really understand your avatar and your clientele. And
Hmm.
it was more kind of working class people that really rented those units.
Got it. Okay, Andrew, I really want to know, how do you stay so productive? What do you do for your productivity?
Good question. So, I literally spend probably 2 to 3 hours every single day towards self care, right?
Hmm.
Focusing on my mind, my body, my spirit, my goals, my intentions, the life I want to live, right? And I try to do that with as much intention as possible, right?
Hmm.
Right. So when I first started in this game, one of the best tools I learned to help me in this mission was the Miracle Morning. Have you heard of it before?
Of course, the book.
Yes, a book and movie, right? They have a ton of books,
Hmm.
right? But the Miracle Morning is so powerful because it combines six of the most used strategies among 500 of the most successful people on their daily routine, right?
Hmm.
And it follows this acronym called SAVERS. S for silence or meditation, A for affirmations, V for visualization, E for exercise, R for reading, S for scribing or journaling, right? So every single morning, I really aim to do every single one of those to really set my day up right.
So that's your morning routine.
That is part of my morning routine,
Take
right?
us through it.
Yep. So I'll definitely do that, right? But, on top of that, I like to really understand, what is my 10-year, 5-year, 1-year goals and what can I do today to get me to that goal, right?
Hmm.
So, I think you have to have some intentionality around all that, right? But ultimately, what life do you truly want to live and how are you going to reverse engineer it and build that into your morning routine?
Absolutely. Now, I do a smaller version of that, but Andrew taught me something that I've been doing with our mastermind for a while now. And that's every single day, even if you only have 5 or 10 minutes, look at your goals for the year and just think, what are 2 or 3 tasks that will push the needle forward for that day? Write those down, get those out of the way first.
Exactly. So one thing I actually started implementing that I really, really love is the monthly mindful day, right?
Mm.
And I literally take one day during the month, typically a Sunday when nobody's really bothering me, and I'll literally spend the whole day at a cafe journaling, the life I truly want to live, and what am I go- how am I going to reverse engineer this on a daily basis to create the dream life, right?
I
So,
love it.
quick example, right? Say, for example, I come up with I call it a one sheet, my yearly goals, right? I want to do 10 trips a year, right? Like, I want to close on 250 doors. I want to house hack another property, right? So if I'm looking at that, how would I build that into my daily routine? So I would think like, what can I do today to push that forward? House hack, maybe make an offer today on a
Mhm.
property. If I want to travel to 10 destinations, maybe plan where I want to go and book a trip, right? If I want to close on 250 doors, walk a couple properties, make a couple offers on some larger properties, right? Those are some daily habits and tasks I can do today to get me to that end vision.
Mhm. Now, let me ask you this. What if a few months into the year, you're realizing you're really not making much progress on your goals, or maybe your goals change and your life is going a slightly different direction?
Yes. You know,
Is it okay to switch gears, maybe change your goals?
yeah, what I would say is the most common reason in my opinion why people don't follow their goals is they don't look at their goals enough, right? It's like if you drive a car, right? And you don't look where you're going, where do you think you're going to end up, right?
Eventually
Yeah,
crashing.
you probably crash. You're probably crash, right? So it's really important to come up with your yearly goals and look at it every single day or a couple times a week. And when you do your daily to-do list, build in goals that will accomplish the things on that list, right? I hear all the time, I my goals are so hard to achieve. I haven't made any progress, but I always ask them, like, when was the last time you looked at your goals? When at the beginning of the year. I'm like, oh, I'm surprised you haven't met your goals. You literally haven't freaking looked at them for 6 months.
And next time you're going to do it is January 1st the next year.
Exactly, exactly. So it's really important to come up with those goals, come up with those intentions, but literally look at it every single day, hopefully during your morning routine, and create intentions around those goals and work at it every single day. You'd be surprised. Committing 5, 10, 15 minutes towards your task can compound over time to something you didn't even think was possible a year from now.
Now, Andrew, talk to me about delegation. Which tasks would you do and which ones would you assign to other people? Because do you really have to do everything on your own to-do list?
Great question, right? Ultimately, people really have to understand their highest leverage point and their average dollar per hour, right?
Hmm.
So, say for example, I make $1 million a year. What's that equate on a dollar per hour basis? $500 an hour for 40-hour work week, something like that.
Something like that.
Something like that, right? So if I get a pair of shoes, right, and they're broken, right, they're $35. Does it make sense for me to return those shoes, drive all the way to the store, return them all the way back, probably 2 hours? Does that make sense for me?
Not at all. Just get a new pair.
Exactly. It makes sense for me just to throw that in the trash, just buy a new pair, right? The same with tasks in your business and in your everyday activities, right? If you're there mowing grass for your property, that's a $20 hour task. If you're making $100 an hour, why are you wasting your time, right? And people really have to understand what is their dollar per hour. And if they're doing low dollar per hour tasks, you either want to create systems or hire somebody to take that off your plate.
Absolutely. Another lens to look at your tasks through is what actually moves the needle forward for your goals versus busy work that seems important but doesn't actually do anything for you. And you can do that by looking at KPIs and leading and lagging indicators that show you if what you're doing is actually bringing you towards your goals or not. And cut out the things that don't, even if they seem important or seem super, super urgent.
Exactly. So if my goal is to get 250 doors this year, right? Let me ask you, what do you think is a leading indicator, right? Making offers on properties or doing my books?
Doing your books might seem very, very tempting because it seems oh so important for the next quarter's taxes, but they're not going to bring you closer to your doors.
You're exactly correct. That means making offers on properties is truly my KPI, right? And then if you take that in conjunction with the highest dollar per hour task, say if I make $200 an hour and doing bookkeeping is $20 an hour, it makes all the sense in the world to sub that out to somebody else.
Absolutely. So, Andrew, one thing that a lot of people do in their life is they try to do all of their tasks, and some tasks they don't even notice are draining their energy, and other tasks are giving them energy, but they just go through that up and down cycle of life and think that's normal. But you've actually figured out how to only do the tasks that give you energy. Why don't you tell us how you did that?
Yeah, so I read this beautiful book called Buy Back Your Time, right?
Hmm.
And in that book, they talk about doing an energy audit, right? And they have you grade everything you're gonna do on a daily basis and what gives you energy and what takes energy away from you, right?
Hmm.
And then more or less, what the goal is you make the list, right? And you put the things that take the most energy away from you, and you work your way down on either delegating, eliminating, or creating systems to take that off your plate, right? And over time, you whittle down the list to figure out things that you only enjoy working on. And when you work on things that you only enjoy working on and give you energy, magical things happen, right? You're more or less sitting in your genius, and your business will exponentially grow, right? So, I think that leads into kind of understanding yourself,
Hmm.
right? And the way I've done that is with personality tests.
Which ones have you taken that are the most effective?
So I've taken Myers-Briggs, right? I've done DISC, but the most effective personality test that I've utilized is called the Cultural Index, right? And what's so powerful about this particular tool is it shows you two graphs. On the top graph, it shows you what are you a genius at? It asks you, what are you a genius at? And then it asks you, how is your genius being reflected in the workplace, right? And if you're sitting in your genius, both graphs will match, right? A lot of times they don't, and when they don't match, that really shows you in areas where you can either bring in somebody's help, create tasks, create systems where you can sit in your genius, and when you sit in your genius, magical things happen.
It's also a good way to see if you're in the correct line of work for yourself as well.
Exactly, exactly.
And so, Andrew, what if somebody's a little bit like our viewers, maybe earlier in their journey?
Sure.
They have a W-2 that they have to work.
Hmm.
They haven't quite gotten that financial freedom, but their W-2 does take energy away from them, and they find it a little bit harder to maybe come up with extra time or money to do some real estate or do a side hustle. How would you manage your energy in that situation? How did you do it when you were working a 9 to 5?
It's a great question, right? The way I did it was I found something that gave me energy, right? Ultimately, people view W-2s as a hindrance, right? But they're a tool. They're a
Mm-hmm.
tool to acquire cheap property with owner occupied loans. You're very loanable, right? It's easy to get a property when you have a strong W-2, right? And when you enjoy your W-2, you typically get paid more, do better, get better recognition, right? So I would implore that person to really understand themselves and find a W-2 where they are actually sitting in their genius. They probably get paid more. They probably enjoy their life more. And then they will have the energy to have that side hustle to really grow their real estate portfolio.
Mm-hmm. As an aside to that, a little personal anecdote, if you feel that your W-2 is kind of all you have and you almost identify with it, like this defines me, like, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm an engineer, whatever it has, and you're not doing so well at your job, or maybe it's just taking energy away from you, you might get really down on yourself because you think it defines you. But if you start looking at it as, hey, I might be a doctor or a lawyer, but this is not exactly who I am, is just one aspect of me. And this is a stepping stool to get me to that property because this is what helps me get a loan, or this helps me support, the down payment for my next property. All of a sudden is just one of the legs of the stool, not the whole stool. And it takes a lot of pressure off of you because it's not your entire identity, it's just one little thing. And you can think about it, hey, maybe I don't like this job very much, but it's temporary. I'm only in it for maybe 3 more years, maybe 5 more years, because then you'll have financial freedom, and then you'll get to have the choice. Do I want to stay in it? Do I want to transfer? Do I want something? Do I want to do something else? Or do I want to transition to become a full-time real estate investor? But it makes, even if it's a painful job, a little bit less painful because it's only temporary, not some purgatory you're in for the rest of your life until you're 65.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely correct, Artem. I mean, that definitely hit home. I mean, at my W-2, I was a project manager at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. I had this identity that I worked at MIT and I worked at Harvard, right? And, in hindsight, when I actually left that job and I became a full-time real estate investor, it was so liberating to
Mm-hmm.
not tie my identity to somebody else's dream and tie my identity to my own dream, right? It was scary. It was scary to jump into the unknown. But what I can assure you is when you tie your identity to your own dreams and your own purpose, you live a much more fulfilling life.
Absolutely. Even I remember my very, very first rental property was at this point 4 years ago. I don't know how I did it, but I would work a full day's worth of work at my job and I'd be just so tired I'd come home and just want to veg out and watch TV. But then when I got that first rental property, it needed a paint job. I would work my 9 to 5. I would be completely wiped, but as soon as I get off, I get all this energy and I'm just painting it away. I painted until was 1 a.m. in the morning, and I would go back to work and do it the next day, and it felt so much better because I was actually working on my dream, improving that property, getting it ready to rent, making that listing, talking to potential tenants. That gave me energy because I got to keep the whole piece of the pie, not be working for somebody else and somebody else's dream and getting a slice of that pie. And that alone just gave me a new perspective on life and gave me so much more energy because I'm working on my own craft, not somebody else's.
That's exactly correct. And at the Freedom Real Estate Podcast, we're all about people going after their own dreams, their own purpose, because ultimately we only got one life and we can't live with regret, right? Tune in next week on the next episode of the Freedom Real Estate Podcast.